Welcome to Austin Tech Connect, the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. My name is Tom Singer, and I have been with ATC now for a little bit over 3 years, and we're coming up on the third anniversary of starting this podcast. And we started this podcast so we can expose you to a lot of different people in our tech ecosystem, both those entrepreneurs, business leaders, and the solution providers who help make this entire community work. And today, we're going to have a great talk with someone who's a little bit newer to Austin, but a long time serving tech companies when it comes to their taxes and other issues around that. But he's only been in Austin a few months. I thought getting his perspective would be a really good thing to do. So today we're going to meet Patrick Smith, a tax principal with CLA. Hey, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me.
Well, we're really glad to have you here, and we're going to get into some of this. But first, we have to thank the sponsor of Austin Tech Connect, and that is Calavista Software. Calavista is all about software development without the drama. Since 2001, Calavista Software has been trusted by startups and Fortune 100 companies alike for their custom software needs. And we are so grateful to them for being a community champion, which is one of those companies that step up and support the different organizations, especially ATC, here in our community, because we can't exist if it's not for the companies like Calavista who make our programs happen. So for those of you who don't know Patrick, and he's new to town, you might not, he is a tax principal with CLA. He has been working in tech for 29 years. He started in the Bay Area in the late 90s, spent 14 years there. Then in 2009, he moved up to Seattle, where he got to work in their very eclectic, growing tech ecosystem. And then earlier this year, he relocated to Austin, and he says one of the things he loves about Austin is just how welcoming the business community is. He showed up thinking it was going to be hard to meet people, and I was really glad to hear that for a newcomer, it's still the way it's always been. People are willing to take the appointment and get to know you. Another interesting little tidbit about Patrick is he has a cat that is 22 years old. Patrick, I didn't think cats live that long.
Yeah, you and me both.
So let's jump into this, but let's start with you. You know, you're a tax professional, right? How did you get into that world? Where'd you go to college, and how did you start serving tech companies?
Yeah, so I went to college in Virginia, in Fredericksburg, not unrelated to Fredericksburg, Texas. And at Mary Washington College, now Mary Washington University. So a small state school just south of D.C., about an hour south of D.C., about an hour north of Richmond. Ultra liberal arts school, but I got a business degree from there and became a graduate. And actually, my first job out of college was with a software company doing technical support and quality assurance. Yeah.
Nice. So then you went over to the dark side of accounting?
I did. KPMG called, and I got an opportunity in the Silicon Valley in 1996 to join them as a tax associate. Spent a couple years there. Went to Deloitte for about 6.5, and then went to BDO for about 11. Made partner there, and then pivoted to CLA in Seattle, and spent about 6.5 years running the technology industry group for the firm. And earlier this year, pivoted out of that role, and my new opportunity was to come to Austin, Texas, and help grow this practice. Nice. So is this a new office for CLA? It's been an office for about 3 years, but primarily we has been a state and local government practice. So we audit the state of Texas and various other state jurisdictions from a private industry and tech industry perspective, fairly young. So we're looking to grow it. Nice. So let's talk a little bit about CLA. Why the focus on Austin? Why did they decide to grow beyond just doing state and government work? Well, as a firm, we're, top 10 national firm. We're in 136 offices, 38 states. Texas is a huge market. So we have, offices in Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth. So it just made sense that, being the tech ecosystem here is growing so rapidly, it made sense for me to kind of make that pivot. Nice. So I brought you on the show to talk about taxes and laws and regulations and what's going on. There were a lot of changes that came out in that big bill that the government passed earlier this year. So let's talk a little bit about taxes in general. We're diving into some important changes that are coming that are going to have a big impact on startups and larger tech companies. And a lot of that's going to affect the companies right here in Austin. So what are some of those changes? Well, there are two really big items that the Big Beautiful Bill brought forward. One is around research and experimental expenses. Back in the day, prior to the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, all R&E expenses were deductible currently. And traditionally, you would think that if you're spending money on an asset, you would have to capitalize that and then amortize it or run it through cost of goods sold. But Section 174 allowed immediate expensing of those costs. Well, part of paying for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was to start capitalizing those costs starting in 2022. And both domestic costs and foreign costs. Domestic costs you capitalize, you get a 5-year amortization. Foreign costs you capitalize, you get 15-year amortization. As 22 came around, everyone said, "Hey, this is a really bad idea. We should fix this." Everybody but Congress, and that was really the big issue. Is Congress couldn't get out of its own way. There were a number of bills that were trying to repeal this piece of the legislation. It just never happened, and then we ended up in an election period, so nothing was going to happen until the OBBA, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, came around.
So it's interesting. I know a lot about that because the Austin Technology Council is part of an organization called TECNA, the Technology Councils of North America. And what a lot of people don't realize is there's over 100 independent technology councils serving cities, regions, and states in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And 66 of these organizations, thereabout, belong to this organization called the Technology Councils of North America. And while it is a best practices group, I meet often with the leaders of these other tech councils in places like Pittsburgh, Arizona, Ohio, Nashville, etc. But the other thing is, and they've existed for many, many years, they are a lobbying group in Washington, D.C. that is focused on the needs of small to mid-sized growth-oriented companies. What a lot of people don't realize is most of the bills that pass or are shot down in Washington, D.C. are lobbied for by the 6 or 8 largest tech companies. It's great because they all have government affairs offices and they go and do that. But what's important for an Amazon or a Microsoft or an Apple isn't always the exact same thing that's true of that startup or that growth-oriented smaller tech company. And so TECNA, along with some other groups, have been fighting for decades to try to make sure that the voice of the small business is heard. And when I came into this job with Austin Technology Council, getting that repealed, the amortization of research and development, was a huge effort of TECNA. So I actually, in 2023, flew to Washington, D.C., to lobby. I met with the offices of our senators and congressmen from the area, and for a couple of years was deeply involved in it. And it was very interesting because what I learned, and I'm going down a little rabbit hole here, is for Microsoft to amortize their R&D doesn't really matter because it's going to be a giant number. And so every year it's going to be about the same when they amortize it if it's spread out over 5 years as if they just do that current year. But for Samantha's tech company that she started that has 17 employees, that difference of being able to write it off, that could be a head count of 2 or 3 employees. That could be the difference between staying in business. So this was a cause that the Austin Technology was deeply involved with. And it's true. They tried to get it passed in 2002. They tried to get it passed in 2003. And then this year, they lobbied hard to get it into that big bill. And it was repealed. So why is that a good thing?
Well, first of all, thank you for your service. This was.
I wish I could take credit. I was just a little person.
So I mean, and you bring up a good example. So I had clients who were funded through grants. So grant funding is taxable income. Well, they spent all the money on what they were supposed to spend it on, which is R&D, right? Well, now you have this grant revenue line. You have R&D. Now you have to capitalize it all in the first year. Now all of a sudden, this startup company with no real profit is paying tax. Just a really bad answer. So with the changes from the OBBA, what they did was they said, okay, look, we're going to allow you to expense domestic R&D expenses. You still have to capitalize foreign and still get 15-year amortization on it, which from a policy perspective, if the intent is to bolster the U.S. Economy or the U.S. focus on developing new technologies, makes total sense. So everyone, when that passed in July, there was a collective cheer, but as with everything, it's the devil's in the details. Everyone's like, "Oh, just immediately expense." Well, there are rules, and so companies have a few options when it comes to actually kind of reversing those costs. Because what they did for small businesses, so under 31 million average gross receipts, you have the option to amend 22 and 23 tax returns. So if you actually paid cash tax in those years, you can amend those returns and get refunds. How quickly those refunds would show up, that's a whole different podcast. But that is an option. The other option is to just take the unamortized portion in 25. Or if your tax position dictates, you could take it in 25 and 26. So you take half in 25 and half in 26. So those are the few options that companies have to kind of take advantage of these of the tax law change. And it's all about planning. So the other thing is that for companies that have already filed their 24 return and then had already capitalized, if you're a small business, there are ways to kind of fix that without having to amend 24. But it's really about these next 2 months. We should be planning. It's thinking about how are we going to best take advantage of. And some companies, if they've got enough net operating losses, they may just continue to capitalize and continue to take the amortization. So there's 4 different options here. It's about running the numbers. It's about looking at your specific situation. And if you're going to get refunds, maybe that's the right answer, but maybe it's not.
So it's interesting, though, in being pseudoli involved, with trying to get that, on people's radar. How many small to mid-sized businesses aren't paying attention to what's going on at the city, state, and federal level around policies around taxes? A lot of them didn't even realize they couldn't amortize it. People I talk to, and it's like, how are you not aware of this? Why is it that some of these businesses that are in the small and growth-oriented stage, A, they're unaware, but B, they're sort of oblivious that policy is important? Why is that?
I don't know if I know the answer to that. I think it's, I think they think there's, this is one of the things too, especially coming from another state that has no state income tax, that they're just unaware of the impact of operating in multiple states and kind of what their business really is. And it's, I want to say it's probably not getting the best advice, not having the best advisors to kind of give them, the footfalls and the missteps that these companies are coming across because they're not engaging the good advisors. So.
Well, and I also think it's part of the more active you are in a community, getting around other people who are running businesses like yours, not necessarily even in the same industry, but just sort of in the same slice of, size and type of stuff that you do. So many people don't go out, they don't meet their peers. And if they don't meet their peers, then these things aren't being talked about over a glass of wine. And then they just don't know. And so that's why I'm always a big believer that if you're running a business, you've got to be involved with something. You don't have to be involved with everything. It doesn't necessarily have to be ATC, although we would like that. You've got to be involved in some sort of a community organization where you're around your peers. So let's move on to section 1202, the qualified small business stock, or QSBS.
Yes.
I can't claim I know anything about this one like the last issue. So let's talk about what that is.
Sure. So this was actually a code section that's been around since the late 1800s. It started out as a 50%. Let's back up. Qualified small business stock is C Corp stock that's originally issued to a shareholder. If the company, and this is the original law, under 50 million in total assets, in a qualified business, so like accountants and service businesses, consultants that wouldn't qualify. These are going to be more, like a software company or a technology company. They're producing something. Original issuance to a shareholder. If you hold it for 5 years and sell the stock, you get a $10 million or 10 times basis exclusion from tax on that gain. So let me repeat that. $10 million exclusion from tax. So tax-free, first $10 million. Sometimes some things are too good to be true. Well, the way the original law was written, there was an AMT adjustment. It was only a 50% exclusion. There really wasn't a whole lot of benefit to it. And as time rolled on, they modified it. They removed the AMT limitation, and they made it 100% excludable. So now all of a sudden you've got real money and real opportunities to save a lot of tax in these qualified small businesses. So what the OBBBA did is they said, okay, for investments after January 1, 2025 or 26, it's a $75 million asset test and a $15 million per shareholder exclusion. And that is per shareholder. So if you've got 10 shareholders, it's 15 for each one.
What if I'm a shareholder, my wife's a shareholder, and my daughter's a shareholder?
Then that is $45 million of exclusion.
Fascinating.
So yes. So, and that's colloquially referred to as stacking. Being able to kind of get those each, that 15 million for each of those. And it's just an amazing benefit. The other thing that the OBBBA did was the holding period. So one of the things that a lot of founders were tripped up on is, hey, they grow so fast. I just set this thing up 3 years ago. Now I'm getting $100 million offer. I'm not going to get benefit for this, this qualified small business stock because now I have to wait another 2 years before I can sell. Well, there are a whole lot of transactions that are going to really want to wait 2 years. So what the new tax law brought in was a 50% at 3 years, 75% at 4 years, and 100% at 5 years. So now we're getting more companies that qualify, a larger benefit, and an earlier access to that benefit.
So it sounds like there's a lot of positives that have come out in the last year with these tax changes. So what should business owners or startups be doing right now to make sure they're taking advantage of these changes and others that we don't even have time to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's about planning. So the planning around your R&D, start thinking about, it's a little more expensive to fund R&D out of the US, but what's the time value of that money? What's the value of getting those deductions currently versus having to take them over 15 years? It's also planning around entity selection, right? So the key thing with qualified small business stock, it has to be a C Corp. It has to be original issuance of a C Corp stock. A lot of companies set up, it's really easy to set up as an LLC, right out of the gate. You get a couple of folks, now you're in a partnership structure. Does that make sense? Especially for companies that are looking to attract professional investment. So PE or VC investments. They really like C Corp structures. They understand what it means. They know what preferred stock is. And I'm seeing a lot more focus from those organizations on wanting to invest in QSBS type businesses.
So anything else for companies as they're thinking about these issues, other things around tax? We're getting sort of to the end of the year. Is there anything else that you think every company should be paying attention to this, whether they work with CLA or they work with somebody else? What should be on the mind of every tech company right now?
It's just planning for year end, depending on whether or not you're on an accrual basis or a cash basis. If you're running on a cash basis, let's take a look at kind of, that spending. One of the other codes sections that was updated was around bonus depreciation. So if you're thinking about if you're doing prototyping or you're buying equipment that would have to be capitalized, you can buy that in December, expense it 100% in the current year versus maybe waiting to buy it in January or February. Thinking about the R&D tax credit. We didn't talk anything about that, but that, the 174, Section 41 is a subsection of that. So the value of pulling that R&D back into the U.S. could create a credit for the company. And for small businesses, there is a payroll offset. We don't have enough podcast time to talk about all the cool things that we could be doing, but that's definitely something to be thinking about as well.
So I want to switch gears here as we go. First of all, thank you for starting the conversation about tax policy and changes and why companies should be aware to the policies that are happening in DC or Austin or the state capital or the city. But I also want to talk to you because you've lived in the Bay Area. You've lived in Seattle during some interesting years there, and you've lived in Austin. Now, one of the things, we can't compare anybody to the Valley, and Austin never wants to claim we're the Valley, right? The Valley likes to say, they think they're the Valley. We don't think we're the Valley. But when you look at Seattle, if you go back 25 years, Austin and Seattle were the two breakout tech communities. And then Seattle kind of leveled off. Not that they died, not that they went bad, but they didn't continue sort of that up and to the right that Austin has sort of seen over the last few years, and certainly the last 5 or 6 years. And so, you've seen a city, that booms. You've seen it sort of level off. You see a city that's continued to go crazy. Now you move to that latter city. What do you think about the Austin tech community besides just, hey, the people are really welcoming? What do you think we're doing well, and what do you think we have to watch out for?
Well, I think one of the best things, one of the differentiators between like the Seattle community and Washington in general is Washington has a very aggressive tax system. The Washington B&O tax is basically a tax on top line gross revenues. So you can be a tech company, you could be losing $10 million a year, and if you've got $20 million top line revenue, you're paying Washington tax. So it's for such a progressive state, it's got the most regressive tax system on the planet. So I think that's one of the best, one of the nice things about Texas and Austin is it's really business friendly. I think the connectivity, and I also think that Austin has an opportunity to kind of look at these other geographies and pick and choose what path they want to go down. But just in general, I think Austin's just got a great, ecosystem. It's got good investors, great college system, and it seemed to be really attractive to foreign direct investment as well. There's a lot of companies outside of the U.S. that look at Austin and say yes. I think another differentiator from say the Bay Area too is I think companies can stand out a little bit better here. I mean, it's so saturated in the Bay Area that it's really hard to kind of differentiate yourself as a startup. And I think there's a bigger opportunity here to kind of make a splash.
Any areas where you think Austin, you could do better?
I don't know. I haven't really seen. The other thing I like about Austin is geographically, it's not hard to get anywhere. That's the thing with the Bay Area was I live in the Domain, and I keep telling people like this is great. I'm 20 minutes from everywhere.
Right.
But maybe more focused. Maybe we need to get more people at ATC. I think we need to get bigger rooms, bigger opportunities. But I don't know. I don't really have any negatives. So
Well, you haven't been here long enough. There'll be a few, but for the most part, I think when we put it on a scale, I always think it tips to the positive. And you bring up a good point, is whether it's ATC or some other groups, we need more of the leaders in the community to just show up when they're not speaking or when they're not hosting the event, because I have a saying that real leaders show up. And so what I tell everybody who often asks, why does so-and-so not participate in the chamber or ATC or this or that? And I say, look, they have their own life going on. Real leaders are the ones who show up. So look around the room of who's here. And so for people who want to get involved, there's always a way in Austin to pull your chair up to the table. And I just want to go back. You do touch on something that I think we take for granted for those of us who've lived here a long time. And that is Texas is without question one of the business friendliest state, if not the business friendliest state. I mean, when you look at the number of headquarters that have moved here in the last 10 years. And then if you talk to our friends at Opportunity Austin, they'll tell you there's a long list of more companies who are considering either opening an office or moving their entire HQ here. There's a reason for that. And, a lot of it has to do with the tacos and the barbecue, but more importantly, it really has to do with that business friendly state and that the tax system that really favors business. And I think sometimes we just need the reminder of that. So thanks for giving us that.
I guess just real quick, I've just been thinking about sort of one of the drawbacks. I think it's probably infrastructure in terms of Austin's grown so quickly that the infrastructure really hasn't kept up with it. So I think that's just a lagging, opportunity.
Yeah, so. And that's I went to college in San Diego and in the 80s, and it had an infrastructure problem because they tried not to believe people were coming in the 70s, and then they boomed in the 80s, and they had to build, and now their infrastructure is caught up. In Austin, I think we're taking the right steps for that. So Patrick Smith, any final words for the audience?
No, I just thank you, Tom. It was great to bump into you last night and get this thing coordinated, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to the ATC community.
Nice. Well, we appreciate you being here, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. We do this podcast for the Austin tech community. It's not for me. I get to talk to all these people every day anyway, but we do it, so that you can find out who's out there. You can think of ideas, maybe some concepts and nuggets of thought that you hadn't thought about before. So make sure that you're sharing this podcast with all of your coworkers, with all of your friends in tech. And if you have an idea of who should be on the show, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's grab a cup of coffee and talk about different people who should be on the show, because the Austin Tech Council, we're here to support everything that touches Austin tech. We don't compete with the Chamber. We don't compete with Capital Factory. We don't compete with Austin Women in Technology or Opportunity Austin. We are a group that is here to help bolster and promote everything that all the groups are doing here in town. But we can't do this without you. It is a community grassroots organization, and that's why we need you, the grassroots of Austin, to support our cause. So please make sure that your company is a member, that you're sponsoring things, and that your people are showing up. We'll see you next week here on Austin Tech Connect.